say a couple of things about the webinar. We are taking questions through the Q&A. So the Q&A is on the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A. If you want to say hi or just good morning, just use the chat to say hi to us. If you want to ask questions, ask the questions using the Q&A. Once Adam finishes with the initial part of his presentation, which is going to be in about, I guess, 30 to 40 minutes, we'll be answering the questions then. The webinar should take about 1 hour in total. So thank you very much all. Adam?
Thank you very much. And can I begin by thanking everyone participating, because I've already got a spectacularly high response rate to my poll, which is fantastic. And I know that some of you are just walking into the room, and I've already got 23 of 31 replies, which is stupendous. So big thank you there. A big thank you actually to Cyprus generally for allowing me to do what is in fact a rerun of a session that happened in a rather boozy pub in Soho in London many years ago, when a group of us got together and decided to rewrite the complaint rules. I promise you we weren't drunk before. We never were drunk in this. There was quite a lot of orange juice and Coca-Cola drunk during these sessions. But Cyprus has been kind enough to let me loose on its rule book on a number of occasions for EIMF, and I thought I'd try and bring something back by raising some of the issues that complaint handlers raise routinely about just about every country in the world. So if you feel like you're being picked on today, you're not. We'd say the same things about Britain. We say the same things or similar things about Britain. We say similar things about Hong Kong and a variety of other locations. When I do courses with the EIMF about complaint handling, I'm always struck by the inherent difficulty of trying to piece together all the bits of the jigsaw puzzle before we start. And that's because I'm used to having a long, badly drafted complaint rule book in the UK called DISP that we all learn to hate because it's dreadful. Whereas in Cyprus, you keep things in a much more compact way, but there are some losses that happen as a result. And one of the issues that I find when dealing with complaints on EIMF training courses is you get participants who are enormously enthusiastic and often very knowledgeable and competent. But there's a sort of missing opportunity to actually discuss some of the underlying issues. So that's what we're going to do today. So we're not exactly going to redraft the rules. In fact, we wouldn't be allowed to, because Cyprus, being a member of the European Union, is still bound by MiFID, and we can't. MiFID is a maximum application directive, so we can't do too much there. What we can do is to elaborate some of the rules in a way that is consistent with MiFID, and that gives us quite a big chance. Let me begin though by ending something. You've been kind enough, 32 of you, that's fantastic, to provide answers to the poll. So what I'm going to do is end it and share it with you, and it'll give you an idea of who's in the room. So we've got an elsewhere in the UK, elsewhere in the EU and in the UK, but predominantly Cyprus, which is what I would have expected. And we've got a fair smattering of different participants coming from different backgrounds and working with different types of product. And we've got a chunk of regulators, which is fantastic, by the way. I've been longing for that to happen. And somebody from the central bank, which is excellent. If you are from those organizations, if you can imagine you're not for the purposes of this webinar, I think you'll get the most out of it, and you'll participate. So if you make a comment in the chat room or in the Q&A, we'll assume you're not from the regulator, and that just gives us an idea. We've got an idea of people's experience. We've got a few people who are new to this, and to some extent I am too, because we're using a slightly different platform to the usual. But thank you ever so much. I will stop sharing that result and say a few quick words of introduction before we get into the basics, complaint handling basics. I'll do this by sharing my screen, which is always a slightly dangerous activity because you don't have total control. Hopefully you can all see this, and if you can't, you'll see a slide. There we are. That hopefully can give you the headings that you're expecting. You can get a copy of these slides afterwards. I'll supply them to EIMF so that they can be circulated. That's not an issue. There are a few basic rules, one of which Maris has just raised. Do please, you can use the chat room to make points and argue. It doesn't have to be in the Q&A column, but I really don't mind. And I'll spot things in the chat room if I can. Do feel free to stay in touch after the event and ask me questions. And if you think I'm talking about things you don't know anything about, don't worry about it. There is a handout, which again will be supplied on request, which is basically my standard EIMF handout for complaint courses. So what are the big complaint handling issues? Well, I put together a shopping list of them. The first one is a peculiar one, and it applies, by the way, in all countries. So, which is locating the rule book. Locating what they cover is a bigger issue than you might think, as we'll see. Do they cover all types of complaint, including about the state of the carpet in the bank branch? What type of complainant? In the UK, we have a funny habit of solving a problem that we just finished dealing with. We recently expanded the scope, the size of complainants, and the result is that we've actually created a new jurisdiction with no cases at the moment, which is a bit of a problem actually. But the reason why we did it was because we had a thing called the interest rate hedging product scandal, which involved lots of small businessmen, typically property developers, being messed up by their friendly bank. And they were a bit too big to be eligible complainants at the Ombudsman, and the scheme that was put in place didn't work. Above all else, people are still arguing all these years later in all countries about what is a complaint. You might think it's a bit obvious. It's not. It causes no end of problems, although a little bit of clarification here might solve a lot of problems. One of the issues is, can the complaint be made orally? The UK rulebook's actually very clear. The answer is yes. I think so is the ESMA and EBA guidelines, although that's a bit more open to question. Much more disconcerting is, do you need to allege any loss or material problem? If you read the EBA ESMA guidelines, there is no such need. The UK's got that built into their rules and has had for many years now, or variations on it. There's no procedure for summary resolution of complaints. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that just shows appropriate respect for the complaints process. I don't think there is a process, but I'm happy to be corrected. As we go further into complaints, it becomes less about complaint rules and a lot more about how you actually do the job. And what exactly you investigate becomes a very hot topic and has been in the consumer complaints world for many, many years, going back into the mid-70s in Britain. Then one curious hole in the ESMA EBA guidelines, which frankly I think CISEC could close up very quickly, and so could the central bank, is the standards that you expect firms to apply when deciding whether or not to uphold complaints and sorting out compensation. Frankly, as you get more complaints and you get more cases going to the Ombudsman, the job may solve itself and may become easier. It's certainly the experience in Britain. Then there is this issue of what is the relationship between the complaint rules that firms have to comply with when they handle cases coming in and the rules laid down by the law on the Ombudsman, which are in some cases possibly quite different. And can you get the linkage to work? There is a lot to be said for doing that. It took Britain about 20 years to get it right. We do seem to have the linkage now, but it's not entirely clean. And as we move towards the end, I had a painful experience actually not very long ago during lockdown of being asked by a friend family friend to help with a complaint about a CFD and a firm in Cyprus, and the firm tried to gag the customer, i.e. say, we'll pay up, but only if you won't talk to anyone else about this. Now, frankly, that was deeply disreputable, and it would be helpful if you made it, if the regulator in not just Cyprus, but everywhere else in the world made it clear that putting conditions on offers of compensation like this is totally unacceptable. There is an issue around your ombudsman service and transparency. All ombudsman services have this problem. The UK had a report delivered by Lord Hunt about 20 years ago on this subject, and it's never been fully implemented, and it's such a shame. But there is some work that one could do there. So those are the issues that I identified as being live for me. But I think we have to be realistic. There are always resource issues. We don't have infinite amounts of the stuff. You know, CySec is a relatively small regulator, and it's got a very outsized contracts for differences industry to regulate, on top of what you would expect to find in any society of, you know, investment advisors, providers, etc. So it's got a distorted amount of work to do, and complaints is probably fairly low on its agenda. The central bank's main agenda is to prevent bank failures, and that's not really about complaints. So I suspect it's not terribly high, and I wouldn't put it if I was running either of those organizations, and trust me, no one's asked me to, wouldn't put it terribly high on anyone's agenda. But as members of the public in Cyprus or elsewhere in the European Union or anywhere else, we've all got these things, and we all would like to think that we were better protected than we probably are if something goes wrong. Similarly, our courtrooms could be jammed. It's happened in Britain. We've tried to get rid of cases into the ombudsman space to prevent judges having to deal with multiple court cases. In the UK, just a few weeks ago, we had a decision on a case which has 20 parallel cases that have been decided by the Financial Ombudsman Service. It would have been so much more efficient for those cases to have remained within the ombudsman world, instead of which they pinned down an awful lot of judicial time. So there is an argument that says we want to push cases down an ombudsman route. It's nicer for the consumers. It's less public for the firms. It's a lot less expensive for the firms as well, by the way. And all in all, it's a better idea. There is a theory that actually complaint rules are part of an axis or a part of a package of consumer protection, which goes like this, which is you have conduct of business rules, which you hope people will observe. You've got, and many of them for investment purposes are located in MiFID and the various subordinate legislation that goes with it. But if you're a banker, it's less obvious in Cyprus, but broadly speaking, you've got rules about how to behave. You've got the enforcement of those rules. You've got that enforcement, including an element of, and now would you like to actively or proactively compensate customers? Then you've got the complaint rules. Then you've got the ombudsman. Then you've got the enforcement of the complaint rules. So you've got a huge bag load of different issues there to deal with. And the complaint rules are really just one part of quite a bigger picture. But they're a very important part, because if they don't work, everything else falls apart, or you get stresses in the regulatory system. Before I go there and talk about our next topic, I'd like to launch another poll, because we're about to deal with the mechanics. And this is the second of 3 polls, so don't think you're going to spend the morning doing polls, but there's quite a lot of stuff to cover here. And if I get the same, by the way, when you do a poll, one of the things you can do them very quickly, because this is just a bit of fun. and it does give me an idea of what's going on. I can't see your responses, so I don't know who's replying with what answer. But if you'd like to get stuck into that, well, I actually deal with the first question, which is, where are the rules? And it's not as easy a question as you think. Most of the rules are located in MiFID Org Regulation, Article 26. And if you're a banker, you're saying, well, that doesn't apply to me. You're right in one sense, but not in another, because this spawned the ESMA EBA guidelines. And they do apply to banks, because if I add a new share in and we go and have a look at your central bank website, there it is. Can you see it? I'll make it a bit larger for you. Essentially, what it says is, everybody go and comply with the ESMA EBA guidelines. It's one document, not two. That's splendid. It does at least move us towards having a single complaint rule book, which is helpful. So what you end up with, if you like, is a strange combination of Article 26 of MiFID Org Regulation, which I hope you can see on your screen, and if you can't, put a note in the chat room, which lays down 7 quite well drafted, reasonably punchy complaint rules, which contrasts with the 900 pages of my book on the UK rules, which will tell you something. Beyond that, we then have the ESMA EBA guidelines, which are here and occasionally get tweaked, by the way. But the real guidelines are sitting at the back, although a very important feature here is that definition of complaint, which we'll deal with very, very shortly indeed. So you can see what the ESMA EBA guidelines look like. They appear to be quite short, and they are, but you'd be surprised how much meat you can pull out of a combination of Article 26 and the ESMA EBA guidelines. You can argue that the guidelines are merely a reflection of the of MiFID Org Article 26. So having said that, if you want firms to handle complaints consistently, it might not be a bad idea to do something about getting all this stuff in one place. That's possibly a very English approach, UK approach. We like putting our rules in one place. It's part of our psyche, I think. By the way, thank you so much. You're getting a lot of replies in on the poll. I'll leave it open just a little bit longer. Now that I've answered my first question, which was, where do you find it all? Or at least I've answered half of it, because one area that is a bit of a leftover, you will find the law relating to the Ombudsman on the Ombudsman website, published in English. I mean, it's fantastic you publish stuff in English like this, but I'm extremely nervous about whether or not I've got the up-to-date version of these statutes. There's certainly some cleaning up that could be done. It's a great piece of legislation, but it could be greater, is really what I'm saying here. But one thing we know is that it picks up virtually everything in the financial services sector, which is how it should be. So you know, add in banking, insurance, etc., and you get something of an idea. All ombudsman schemes struggle with describing what they cover, you know, your one is as good as any. So ultimately, these are the tricks we play with. There is a CISEC circular, and I think the CISEC guide is probably better than the circular. But again, one could build these things out to pick up everything else. The ADR directive isn't a particular problem for you. You have an advanced disclosure requirement, which a number of Cyprus banks do comply with and one or two don't. But you need to sort it out because it is part of the rules. And your statute, which basically governs CISEC, does have a passing reference. So what does Article 26 cover? Well, it says you better have some policies and procedures. Well, that makes sense. Never quite sure what the difference is. You need to record complaints. You need to publish stuff, which makes sense. It's always a requirement that complaints should be free. One of my slight beefs with the Ombudsman is I think you charge a nominal fee for bringing a case to the Ombudsman, which I would happily like to get rid of, because people who are genuinely poor would be reluctant to pay it, even though to many of us it would be regarded as less than the price of a meal. MiFID org requires you to have a complaints management function, but doesn't tell you what it is. It says it could be the compliance department, but there are reasons why it probably shouldn't be, which is that you lose your second line of control if you do that. A lot of this is pretty obvious, and I don't need to say much more, except to point out identify root cause analysis at the end as a bit of a problem, because firms find it incredibly difficult to do effectively, and I don't blame them. Look, I've got some excellent replies, so thank you so much. Let me end my poll and share the results, and we can see what they are. So what do you think the most common reason for getting fined is? This is fun. The actual answer is rejecting complaints that should be upheld. It's far and away the biggest area, followed by bad investigations, which often come together. Misidentifying or misrecording complaints, which got the biggest vote, is an area that's been dealt with, but frankly, it's probably dealt with less frequently than not honouring an ombudsman decision. Probably more regular. I don't think there's ever been a complaint about faulty reporting or missing the time limits. There've been the odd fine for not having a complaints procedure. So what do you think the most common reason for enforcement? Now, this is kind of cheeky, because my answer to this was don't know, because I can't find any cases on this. And I would be extraordinarily grateful if after the webinar, people emailed me with links to enforcement actions taken about complaint handling, because I haven't seen any. And that raises a point, because if regulators publish this stuff very prominently and give detailed reasons for reaching the conclusions they have, I mean, the CISEC standard enforcement action simply lists the rules that have been broken, which isn't quite what we need to know. We need to know how they were broken. You know, that would be helpful. So areas you're particularly interested in is the scope of the rules and identifying complaints. Interesting that you've got 14 votes for an area that I think is a hole in the ESMA EBA guidelines, namely the standards used in resolving complaints. There is a solution to that. It's very easy to suggest and would be consistent with all your European obligations. So which of these should we discuss? Again, standards getting the biggest vote of all, but everything has got a bit of a vote. So can I thank you all, over 30 of you who answered that poll, and encourage everybody else to, because it's affecting the webinar you're getting. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the standard complaints procedure. Goes like this. And I'm just going to slide this up on the screen quickly. The two items at the end don't fit the sequence, but everything else must follow in the right sequence. If you get out of order, then bad things happen to complaint handling. If you identify a complaint by deciding whether it's any good, then you will misidentify complaints as sure as night follows day. And if you want to mess up the assessment of a complaint, you assess the complaint before you finish the investigation. It's the sort of less speed, more haste, or is it the other way around? And finally, typically we've got record keeping and reporting. The three items at the bottom don't really fit the type sequencing properly, and that's why we put them in different color. So let's get on with the identification of complaints. The first issue we've got straight away is what is a complaint? And for that, I want to have a look at the actual text. Let's go and have a look at that. And then what I'm going to do is to launch my third and final poll quickly, which will set up this session. There's the definition of a complaint. I hope you can see it. And I think we can launch our last, third and final poll, which probably is what we need to do. And it's going to ask you a string of questions about how you run your complaints functions. Some of them are slightly cheeky, actually. But if you're a regulator, please imagine you're working for a firm now. It will answer a whole lot of problems. I also think you'll find it quite an amusing experience. So while you're doing the poll, I'd rather you concentrate on that than on what I'm saying, possibly. But just to walk you through a statement of dissatisfaction addressed to a firm by a natural or legal person, relating to all these good things. MCD is mortgages, electronic money, payment services, UCITS. These are all things covered by your financial ombudsman service, financial ombudsman, I should call it. And of course, any investment service, all picked up. One thing you do have, which is implicit in the UK rules, not expressed, is the term addressed to a firm. So if I'm incredibly rude about a firm on Twitter and I forget to put the Twitter handle in or the Twitter address of the firm in question, that's not a complaint. It is if I do. And it's an interesting question of whether or not it is a complaint if I send it off. If I put something up there knowing that a bank is following me on Twitter, leave that one to think about. In reality, firms should be monitoring their social media feeds to see what's going on. But answers are now coming in thick and fast, which is great. It may be while the poll is going on, because the poll does ask a question about identifying complaints, we should perhaps say a few quick words about complaints management policies and procedures. The key trick here is to have a proper procedure, which, by the way, is a good deal longer than this in real life, because you should actually know how every stage of the process is going to work. Every firm has to have a complaints management function. Although MiFID org suggests it could be the compliance department, I hope you can see where the conflict of interest would be. I'm concerned that I may be compromising my poll by trying to answer the next question. So if you can quickly bash through, I've got 10 answers already. I'd like to get to 30 if I can. That would be nice. But in the meantime, let's get into identifying complaints. The initial point is, and here firms argue about this endlessly for some strange reason, is you don't like them, you're cross, you disagree, you can complain very politely, and these are the cases that get missed. Say if you're the easiest example, so we all probably got insurance of some sort, is if a claim has been rejected by the insurance company, if we say, I don't think so, I think you're wrong, that's a complaint. And some guidance in this area wouldn't go amiss, because firms do get themselves into a tangle here. But is there a requirement for an allegation of financial loss or material distress? Well, no is the obvious answer. If we go back again to the ESMA EBA guidelines, it doesn't talk about that at all. It says a statement of dissatisfaction. So if you're those of you who come from the ordinary banking world, and all of us have a bank account, I think, most of us do anyway, a complaint about the cleanliness of the bank branch carpet, it's a classic pre-lockdown complaint, if you like, is treated as seriously as you stole £1 million from me, which doesn't necessarily make sense. The UK actually has a requirement that you allege a financial loss, doesn't matter how small, so you forgot to pay me, send me a reply paid envelope, or material distress or inconvenience. That's not in the ESMA EBA guidelines. if it's felt that a statement of dissatisfaction should include that, it would be helpful if SciSec and the central bank said so. Because it's widely thought when I do courses, when I ask this question, they all say, oh, minor complaints are not included. Well, they are, according to the guidelines issued by the ESMA, EBA, ESMA and EBA. So that needs to be clarified on its own. Can I just have a couple more answers to the poll, and then I'll shut it down and show you the answers. And that will take us through quite a lot, because I've got some interesting answers and some very split answers that will take us through to the end of the webinar. So if I can have 2 more votes, it would make a difference. Otherwise, I'll end the poll and share it with you. Let's have a look at the results. In a reasonably, well, MiFID says it can. I don't think it ever should, because, but again, there's nothing in the rule books to stop you from doing this, but you're effectively marking your own homework. So I prefer it to be somewhere else. My personal view is it's buildings and maintenance. Anybody that everyone's really scared of is the perfect complaints department. But a lot of you think it should be in compliance or a support thing behind it. Now, this is important. Question 3, can a firm decline to receive oral complaints? Well, 9 of you have said yes. And I've heard this come up in seminars over the years in all kinds of places. The actual rule says a statement of dissatisfaction. It doesn't say in writing. And there's quite a good reason why it shouldn't, which is that there are plenty of people who can't write or feel uncomfortable writing and are much more comfortable ringing their friendly bank or investment firm. And they are just as valid complaints as anyone else. The UK rule book actually has a definition oral or in writing. But I don't think ESMA EBA guidelines intended the complaints to be in writing, because if they had, they would have said so. They don't say that. So that's an area for a SciSec central bank piece of guidance. And you don't think you can handle a third-party complaint? Well, the answer is, I would have voted yes, you can. And the way you do it is your job is to receive the complaint. It's not to answer back. So if Marios is wife, partner, whatever, wishes to make a complaint on his behalf, it's highly unlikely. Happens about 1 in 1,000 cases that a third party rings up unauthorized to do so. Now it says a statement of dissatisfaction addressed by a natural or legal person relating to the provision of these things. By the way, it doesn't even say the customer. But more importantly, when you receive a complaint like that, you don't say a word except to thank the caller, of course. You then acknowledge the complaint to the complainant, the real complainant, the real customer, and proceed, and you explain what's happened. You invite the customer to correct it if something's gone wrong. And as I said, the number of times when it's been corrected is pretty much non-existent. It's a long time since I've seen one. What do you feel about ombudsmen and regulators asking firms to handle the complaint that the customer should have raised? Well, I think most of you are right here. The ESMA EBA guidelines do in fact require the assessment to be of the complaint, not exactly what's been said. Do you call the customer? I've seen an excellent question. To call if he's okay with the complaint. No. What I would do is I would acknowledge the complaint to the customer, because you don't have a relationship of this type with the customer necessarily. So acknowledge the complaint and invite the customer to correct any errors in what you have noted down as being the call. And you also invite the customer as part of that process to authorize you to deal with that third party, so they can sign a little form or send a power of attorney or whatever. Because remember, you've got vulnerable customers. You don't know this customer's not just had a stroke, and is unable to handle their own affairs, they may have a power of attorney in place, which can then be posted immediately back. So thank you very much for that question. Very good one. Do keep them coming. And we're already on the program with questions like that. So it's a very helpful thing to do. So yes, the actual guidelines that we'll see do really require a response to cover everything. And in reality, of course, there's no way that the average customer knows about something that's gone wrong. And the case I was handling involving Cyprus, my reaction to this situation was to say there's no way this customer would have passed an appropriateness test. So I suggested that we asked for a copy of it, and there was none. Now, there's no way that the customer knew there was an appropriateness test that should have been done. He just knew that he was not supposed to be receiving advice from the firm. That's a completely different thing. He was upset the firm had withdrawn support from him, when in fact they shouldn't have been giving them the support in the first place. What about the customer who says, I don't want this to be treated as a complaint? Well, you've got an 18-10 split. We'll call it an 18-11 split, because the correct answer, I think, is that it is a complaint. You just write to the customer without using that word, and you can do it quite easily. Thank you so much for your call or your email or whatever, expressing your concerns about. It's important from a regulator's point of view that all complaints are captured properly, because if they're not, then we'll never find out who's upset, and people who don't want to cause any trouble or are scared that they're going to be put through some brutal complaints process are just going to run away and not going to interact with firms, and that's wrong. Is a customer who we've got a clean split, and the correct answer is the slight majority. If you do express concern that the price has gone up, that's a statement of dissatisfaction, isn't it? And increasingly, the UK, it is being treated as such. It used not to be. The threatening letter, yes, it is a complaint. You're absolutely right, the vast majority of you, and there is a cute way of handling it. But again, some lawyers think, because I don't know why, but think that somehow a threat to sue you comes outside the complaint rules. It doesn't. It's wrong. There's another question in there. If we do not inform the client that we're calling because of the complaint, then how do we invite him to correct the info? The answer is you send an acknowledgement letter to the complaint, treating it as if it was made with the authorization of the customer, because by and large, that's really what happened. So, dear Mrs. Kyriakos, thank you. So we received a call from your partner, Caroline Kyriakos, about your bank account, or your about your bank account, expressing concerns that charges have been levied that should not have been. Could you please tell us or confirm to us that this is a correct understanding of your complaint, of what you have to say, and that your partner was authorized by you to make that call? Or better perhaps would be, please correct anything that's wrong in this letter. You shouldn't really ask for confirmation of authorization. You just simply say, is this correct? And invite the customer to correct it, and that solves the problem. And you don't breach data protection that way. The purpose of the complaint identification process is to receive, not to give, in general terms. But thank you for that question, which I made a bit of a mess of answering. We can talk about it more after we finish the formal agenda. Does root cause analysis work? You are idealists, because I think I'd probably vote no. I suppose it's made a contribution of sorts, but not as much of a contribution as I think regulators think it does. And there is when there's a mismatch of expectations, there's problems. We need to get cracking through some of these issues that we've been talking about, and that's exactly what I'm proposing to do next. So I need to clear my board out slightly. And go back to our slides. because we've now set ourselves up beautifully. So at the moment, you don't have that allegation, and I think it should be dealt with. It would be a good idea if our regulators made it clear that complaints can be made orally. We know in Britain about our levels of literacy are very poor, and many people who can read and write do find writing difficult. Now, if you follow the ESMA EBA definition, strictly speaking, it doesn't say by or on behalf of the eligible complainant, but legally that's correct. In other words, if you receive a statement of dissatisfaction from somebody in that way, then, and I can illustrate this, it is in fact addressed to the firm by a natural or legal person, and therefore it is included. Andy, you've asked me a fascinating question about in the chat, in the Q&A column. I'll deal with that one afterwards, if I may, because it's fiddly. And if I don't carry on, we'll never get to the end of the official agenda. But thank you. It's a good question. And do keep them coming, because they will fuel our end discussions. So that hopefully deals with the question about third parties. Now, there's an issue here about eligible and knowledgeable complainants. Under MiFID, in fact, all the European directives, I think you have the same issue with the Insurance Distribution Directive. You have a problem, which is that a lot of people are protected by MiFID that would never have the right to go to the Ombudsman. And the issue arises as to what extent, as the extent to which firms should follow through a proper complaints process. It's very unclear in anybody's rule books, and it's something that certainly should be discussed. Do regulators expect firms to reach fair and reasonable results in cases that frankly turn up in a courtroom more naturally? And under MiFID, there is no summary complaints resolution procedure. There is in the UK. You can avoid sending a final response letter if you can resolve the complaint by the end of the next 3 business days. It's a very controversial and somewhat messy process, but a lot of banks find it very useful. You could argue very strongly it's not worth the effort, because banks are perfectly capable of putting out a very quick final response letter that could almost be in semi-standard form. The UK, they used not to require this. Now they require a summary resolution communication, which frankly looks pretty similar. So the next question is, who are the eligible complainants? Well, this is what they are at the Ombudsman. But are these the eligible complainants for the purposes of the ESMA EBA guidelines? Well, it doesn't say, is the short answer. And I think particularly when you come outside MiFID, you've got to should answer this question, because a lot of firms do not think about this question. Some say, oh, they're very rich and big business, they're not eligible. And this may or may not be what you actually intended. But I think it's a policy issue that needs to be handled. And in the UK, we had this horrible interest rate hedging product problem, which resulted in us raising our business limits to about 5 million, I think it is, off the top of my head. Now, what do you investigate? Well, I think we've concluded that the answer is what the customer should have complained about, not just what they did complain about. And that's part of Ombudsman folklore in Britain. So we need to know these questions in real life. The need to widen the complaint is because the average customer simply doesn't know. And I think we looked at that during the poll. But again, it would be helpful if this was said out loud. It's not said out loud in the UK, and we've been talking about this, as I said, from the birth of ombudsman in the early 80s, and before that, even in the courts, as far back as 1975. Now, the big hot topic, the hot topic you raised in your poll was assessment. Now, we've got a time bar set up in Cyprus that's very tight indeed. 15 months, it's 3 years in English law, 3 years in the UK Ombudsman rules, UK DISP rules. We've even then got 6 years going, complain within 6 years of the actual event. Now, this is the Ombudsman's assessment criteria, and they sound about right. And they're very similar to UK, other places. But this is where there is a sort of disconnect between the ESMA EBA guidelines, which are silent on the subject. And as far as I know, so is CISEC in their various circulars and the central bank. And the obvious sensible thing to do, which would be to marry the two together. I say obviously sensible, it took years for the UK to get this right, so can't see the reason why you should find it easy. Do we use the same standards for business complaints? For complaints that are miles outside the Ombudsman jurisdiction and frankly do not involve any form of consumer protection, even construed pretty widely. So we're almost rolled our way through the big issues of the day. Yes, it's pretty obvious that the final response needs to be in plain language and refers the customer. Referring the customer to the regulator, which is a Cyprus phenomenon, is a bit pointless because your regulator doesn't handle complaints. So it doesn't make sense, actually. We normally put in thank yous, and this is how to do it in real life. And on EIMF courses, we actually draft these letters. But you can see straight away that it would be helpful if we had a set referral to the Ombudsman. Be careful with this because you should actually have the time limit warning in it. And again, the ESMA EBA guidelines do not, as far as I know, have any such thing. They don't have a warning that if you don't get to the Ombudsman or the complaints body on time, that you'll be timed out. And it raises another question, which is, you may be timed out at under the law relating to the Ombudsman, but does the firm still have an obligation to handle a complaint fairly? The answer is probably not, but it would be nice if somebody said so. So under MiFID, you are expected to add in the fact that you have the right to sue. It's a bit pointless, but because it's pretty obvious you can sue. But a question that's been raised is, can you get the right Ombudsman in the right country? And the answer is not a straightforward one sometimes. I know of a case where a firm was an insurance firm, insurance broker, arranged insurance for home removals, but the insurer was German, the firm was English, and the issue was, was the customer adequately protected as far as the trade rules, the trade body of removal firms was concerned? And the only way you could do this would be if you persuaded the German firm to voluntarily agree to the UK Ombudsman having jurisdiction over complaints about claims. Because essentially, if the customer's complaint was, you didn't pay my claim, it was only covered by the German Ombudsman scheme, since there's a general rule that you base these things around where the establishment was, where the activity occurred. It's a bit more complicated than that with Europe, but European Union and investment matters. But fundamentally, that's the rule. And customers would have had to deal with the German Ombudsman scheme, even though they were trying to move house in Britain. So my final sort of area in this final point here is the gagging order. Do not under any circumstances permit yourselves or permit firms to put conditions on their offers of compensation. Firms have an obligation to handle complaints in a fair fashion. They don't have the right to gag customers, not permitted. If we go to the ESMA EBA guidelines, you're just supposed to be communicating in plain language, which is clearly understood. And you're supposed to, I think we've all agreed, reach fair results when we handle complaints, and that's really not good enough. I want to finish the formal part of our presentation, and I'll deal with anything on the Q&A column. I've done a few Q&A bits actually as we've gone along, as you might be able to work out, by asking you, dealing with one other question, a couple of other questions quickly. There's a couple of things about the Ombudsman scheme, by the way, before I forget. Awards not being binding on the firm, that's regarded nowadays, it used to be regarded almost as a requirement under EU law, but frankly, when handling a complaint against a firm that can get out of the Ombudsman award by just saying we're not bound by it, is deeply unsatisfactory. And really, it would be a good idea to make your Ombudsman scheme work better. The 50,000 euros is far too low. We know in the UK, where the figure is now in the, well, it would be the equivalent of over 400,000 euros. Even that doesn't pick up a lot of trouble that we found, say, with the interest rate hedging products scandal. It's certainly a subject that needs to be discussed. Because what you might want to do is to keep cases out of your courtrooms. Now, no regulator, as far as I know, has ever done the smart thing, and or at least no government, no rules policy of saying if you go and sue somebody when you can jolly well go to the Ombudsman, you will be penalised on cost. There's one English case which suggests that that might be the case. I think it should happen more often. But if you're going to do that, you need to make the awards binding and the maximum award limit a bit higher. It won't work otherwise. And again, have you got your eligible complainant in the right, at the right height, shall we call it? I think it's probably a bit too low. So you're not picking up stuff within the system. You've got a summary dismissal process for no significant loss. The trouble is that judging what a significant loss is isn't easy. But okay, there it is. The time bar limit, I think, is a bit brutal. Just finally, some words about root cause analysis. Deep down, I actually don't think this works. And the reason why it doesn't work is we try and produce a lot of data. We don't produce much understanding. And the root cause might be something like we appointed the chief executive, we did, and that chief executive may have left anyway, and it's rather pointless. I prefer firms to learn from complaints by just reviewing the files and going, we got that wrong, or we could improve on that, and that. Much more effective than doing all this stuff, because although if you do spring a leak on a complaint, you discover that something bad has happened, you must contact the regulator. But I have very, very serious doubts. That's the end of our formal presentation, which leaves me with some Q&A to deal with. Okay. And as I said, I've been picking my way through them.
Adam, I'm back with you as well.
Yes, good.
Thanks for a great presentation so far. Very interesting. Thanks to all our participants who are still here and taking part in the poll questions. Thank you very much.
Yep.
As far as the questions are concerned, I think you have already answered the first couple of questions, which came in very early in the presentation.
Which is very helpful.
The customers to check if he's okay with the complaint and asking why was not him doing the complaint. I think that was answered, correct? Mm. Yes.
Yep. I'm down to the last three. I can do them very quickly.
Okay, go for it.
Some of the Jeffrey, your excellent question is one I don't know the answer to. It's a short answer. On the other hand, a lot of this networking of ombudsman schemes I've not found terribly useful. So it may be that the financial ombudsman in Cyprus has taken a view that it's just not worth the effort. Can you still make a claim in the member country? Must it go to the passported country? It depends where the complaint typically. It's very, very complicated question is the real answer, Andy. But the traditional answer is, does the complaint relate to an activity from an establishment in the passported country? So if you're passporting into Cyprus, if it's a Cyprus establishment, it goes to there. but I'm nervous about answering it because I may be wrong. Finiki, this is a really interesting question. So if they refuse to provide supporting evidence of the transaction, should we list and investigate a complaint from a fraud customer? Yes, is the short answer. You investigate it because it's a complaint. You might reject it very quickly on the basis that you've established that there's an underlying fraud, or the customer is refusing to give you the information that's required for you to investigate the complaint. The real secret of success here is explaining to the customer why you need the information in order to investigate the complaint. Yes, there are fraudulent complaints out there. They're not half as many as people think. But the smart thing to do is to investigate. Now, the problem you get is that saying to your customer, we think you're fraudulent, is not an attractive sound. It's not a message you really want to send. And one way the UK handles this, which you might find interesting at least, is the Ombudsman writes to say, this is not a complaint that is suitable to be determined for an Ombudsman scheme. Those of us in the know realize that's a way of saying, customer, we think you're fraudulent. And we don't want to answer it. Do you think we should include? Yes, I think you must include referral to the Ombudsman in all your final responses to customers. Excellent question. And it should also contain the time limits, because if you don't say you have 4 months to go to the Ombudsman and the customer misses the deadline, it would be open to the Ombudsman to ignore that time limit rule. And that's certainly been the position in the UK Ombudsman for years. So very, very important that you do so. I think it's also a requirement of the ESMA EBA guidelines, but I'm virtually certain it is. But frankly, even if it wasn't, you'd be very ill-advised not to do it. Because yes, it says in guideline 7, when providing a final decision, includes a thorough explanation, e.g. the availability of an ombudsman, ADR mechanism, national competent authorities. By the way, it may amuse you to know that Cyprus, I don't think, has ever insisted on final responses being in writing. And of course, if you're dealing with someone who's blind, there's a good case for providing a CD or a telephone call. But if you do that, please keep a record. So you are required to keep adequate records. One last thing I wouldn't mind, now I've done all my Q&A and I'm bang on schedule, is one last little plea. I know your Ombudsman is a small organization and relatively under-resourced as a result, but if it could provide the level of information about how it decides cases that we get from the UK Ombudsman, even though the UK has never really fulfilled its transparency promise that it made after the Lord Hunt report, it would make life innumerably easier. For example, the answer to the last question, if the Ombudsman had said, and by the way, we allow complaints to be brought late if the firm has not put in the time limit in the final response letter and not referred the customer to the Ombudsman, then that would have answered that last question better than I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. We do have one question that just came in. If you can also answer that one,
is he looking at them?
Then we'll close the discussion.
Oh, sorry, I missed the last one. I apologize. Yeah.
There is another
two more.
Two actually. They just came in at the same time.
Yeah, I can do them very quickly.
Yes.
This would be something that an organization would be penalized. The answer is it should be. Is the answer to the last question. If you don't refer the customer to the Ombudsman, you're in breach of the ESMA EBA guidelines, which are incorporated, if you're a MiFID firm, into MiFID. And the requirements of Article 26 of MiFID org regulation will almost certainly have been broken in the process. If you are a bank dealing with customers' deposits and the like, the central bank would be very much at liberty to take enforcement action against you, because you would not be fulfilling their requirements as set out in on their website. Now I've got one more, which is the CFD service. Yeah, I know about product intervention measures. Is that a poor record? look, don't beat up the regulator, is the short answer to the penultimate question. Regulators all have resource limits, and they have to manage those resource limits as best they can. And the way that CySec appears to do it is they pick off 2 or 3 firms every year. If you look at the enforcement actions list, you can argue that they should pick off a lot more, but they haven't got the resource to do it. And by finding 3 or 4 firms each year and saying what they're finding them for, they are aiming to improve standards. They pull the odd license, sometimes behind closed doors and you don't know about it, but it does happen. If I want to criticize CySec in a slight way, it would be that they really ought to give more detailed reasons why they're fining people. They usually just say, breach the rules on appropriateness testing. If we knew exactly what breach it was, then we could say to people, don't do that one again. Or CySec takes a very strong view of behaving in this particular fashion. But please always remember, you have a relatively small regulator, and the old rule about regulations, it's always slightly doomed to fail, because in order for it to be adequately funded, you would never, ever be able to have an industry, because the amount you'd be paying to fund the regulator would bankrupt the industry. So it's always a bit of a difficult one. One last point just come in. We received the complaint over recorded line. Can we respond likewise, or should it should be in writing? Now, well, you have a choice under the rules in Cyprus. You could make give a final response letter over a recorded take line. Talked about this with a number of UK complaint experts. The UK, you're not allowed to do that, but in Cyprus you are, and there's no real reason why you shouldn't, as long as you've kept the recording. If you've kept the recording, why not? There are plenty of people. The art, by the way, anonymous attendee, as you're described on my screen, of handling complaints is to match communication methods. So if I email you, don't ring me up. In fact, can I finish with a story that comes from my very first EIMF course in Limassol, one of my favorites of all time, actually. We're talking about the use of the telephone, and I'm slightly hard of hearing, or increasing as I get older, so I become less and less fond of the phone. But anyway, we had this delightful lady, very good complaint handler at a bank, and gave the example of her complaining on behalf of her husband, and I've forgotten his name. I'll call him Theodore. And I said, now, if the bank were to ring your husband at 4 o'clock in the afternoon today to discuss his complaint, where is he likely to be? And I was expecting the answer in the factory or at work or the office, instead of which I got the answer, fast asleep. Would you really like to be woken up by your friendly bank to discuss the complaint you made? Probably not. It's right. I think that's probably Adam, a good note on which to finish.
Yes, thank you very much, Adam, for all your time, for an excellent presentation again. I just shared in the chat with everyone, because I just noticed that we're going to be seeing you again online on May 18th, presenting at EIMF, handling complaints, treating customers fairly, product governance, financial promotion. So that's a long program. I see here several meeting dates, so I will have a chance to be with you on another 6-7 occasions in May. That would be great, and also in June, actually. So thank you all for attending. I share the detail as well in case you're interested about seeing Adam in May during that webinar. Thank you all for being with us, and have a great day. Thank you, Adam. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Adam, since you're a host, would you mind closing it? Because
I need to shut everything down now. Yes. Okay, I want to hang around and chat to people, but I know you're not allowed to. It's my natural instinct, and it's how we run the courses, by the way. A lot more interaction, lots of chatting and arguing and disagreeing and all kinds of other fun things. Okay, let me just focus on stopping sharing my screen and getting away from the ESMA EBA guidelines, which it probably needs. And all I have to do, oh God, I've just messed this up. People will hopefully be leaving while I'm doing this and working out what on earth I've done wrong. Have I ended the meeting without? No, I haven't.
No, no, you haven't.
I know what I've done. Yeah.
You're going to make me back into a host, please, so I can edit?
I think I'm going to make you a host. It's easier. I've worked out what I've done wrong as well. There you go. You can end it.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll talk later, Adam. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, sure.